So it's my honor to, I had all these great things to say about Clay Christensen. I was going to do the wax on, wax off thing, you know, the master, because he's such a nice guy, and he's such an incredible thought leader, and he's done so much for this industry. But yesterday, his good friend Peter Cohen said, hey, can I introduce Clay? I've got some things to say about it. So please welcome to the stage, Clayton Christensen and Peter Cohen.
I'm not Clay Christensen. I helped found the conference, and I just want to say a few words about Clay and two quick stories. So first off, I believe Clay, with his book that he published in 2007, really started this whole evidence-based innovation and really changed the world. And I believe if there were Nobel prizes given in innovation, Clay would be a winner. But I think Clay is more than that, and I like to use a Yiddish term called mensch. Mensch means being a good person down to your soul. And Clay is one of the few people that I believe in this world who are like that. Let me tell you just two quick stories that are related to the front end of innovation. We started, as you know, in 2003, and my goal was to have both great academics and great practitioners as part of this conference. Prior to this, in fact, even today, you have wonderful academic conferences that no practitioners speak at, and you have great practitioner conferences that no academics speak. In the beginning, when we started, I had no speaker budget, but I wanted great speakers. And in 2000, when we started in 2003, I called up Clay and I said, Clay, here's my vision. I don't have a budget. I can't pay you. And Clay, within that same call, said, fine. Although I will tell you he had one proviso: the conference needed to be in Boston. And as a result, the conference remains in Boston, so we can attract great speakers like Clay. The second story, again related to the inner part of who Clay is, we did one of our first conferences in Europe. And Clay was our lead speaker. In fact, we blew our whole speaker budget on Clay. About 3 months before that happened, Clay unfortunately had a heart attack. We called up Clay and said, Clay, we understand the medical situation. There's no need to come. And he said, I'm going to try. And again, a month before, we said, Clay, you really don't need to come. And he said, look, I promised I'll come. I'll really try. And that was his first trip that he came with his wife to the conference. And I think that just, again, who Clay is. With that, I'd like to welcome Clay to FEI for our third conference.
Well, I'm honored that you would waste an hour of your time with me. But I hope I've got some ideas that will be useful in innovation. There's a puzzle about innovation. And that is, every time you put together a business plan and you try to get funded, you do every piece of market research that you can imagine. You build financial models of it. You look at what competitors are doing. You get the best technical people you find. You get funded by people who are very smart people. And after all of that work, getting the best insight you can, about 80% of the time, the project fails. And the puzzle in my mind is, why is it that the best thinking you can get your hands on can only be right 20% of the time? Is innovation intrinsically a crapshoot? That means if you want to grow a new business, you've got to try 10 in order to make it. And that's kind of the general view of innovation, that it is intrinsically unpredictable. And over the last 20 years of studying the problem, I and my colleagues have concluded that it's actually predictable. But the reason why it appears to be unpredictable is the way that we teach marketing at places like Harvard are incorrect and faulty in the logic. And in particular, the idea that we need to understand the customer is a faulty way of thinking about the structure of innovation. And so I'd like to take you through that logic. So here I am, Clayton Christensen. And as you can see, I have all kinds of characteristics and attributes. I'm 6 feet 8 inches tall, unfortunately, so I'm always knocking my head off when I go through doors. I've been trying to lose weight for 30 years, unfortunately. I just turned 65, unfortunately. I married a wonderful wife, fortunately. The third of our 5 children went to Stanford, unfortunately. And there are all kinds of other characteristics and attributes about Clay Christensen. But none of my characteristics and attributes have yet caused me to go out and buy the New York Times today. There might be a correlation between my characteristics and the propensity that I will buy the Times. But my characteristics don't cause me to do that. Nor do my characteristics cause me to buy any product or service. But rather, what causes us to buy a product or service is that, darn it, stuff happens to me every day. Jobs arise in my life. And when a job arises in my life, some of these are little incremental, repetitive jobs that arise that you have to address. Others might be breakthrough, life-changing jobs that you're confronted with. But when we have a job, we then have to find something to buy or use or pull into our lives in order to get the job done. And understanding what the job is, it turns out, is the reason why innovation seems to be unpredictable. If we understand the job deeply, the probability that we will succeed is nearly 100%, because the jobs are the causal. Understand the job allows you to understand the causal mechanism behind a customer's decision to purchase. We ran into I had a couple of bouts with cancer, and part of the impact on that is I can't feel my feet, and so sometimes I just need to sit down. As we've been trying to understand this puzzle, we realized that McDonald's was trying to increase the sales of their milkshakes. And McDonald's are very sophisticated marketing people, as you know. And so they had, in a very interesting way, they had a profile of the quintessential milkshake customer, defined by demographics. And so they'd invite people who fit in that demographic to conference rooms, and they'd ask them, could you tell us how we can improve the milkshakes so you'll buy more of them? And because of the way they picked their clients, they got very deep insight They would then improve the milkshake on those dimensions of performance, and it had absolutely no impact on sales or profits whatsoever. So when we understood that they had that puzzle, we invited them to frame the problem differently. And that is, there's got to be a job out there somewhere that causes people, when they have that job to do, to go to McDonald's to hire a milkshake to do that job. What's the job? And so one of my colleagues decided to stand in a McDonald's for 18 hours one day. And he took very careful notes about what time did they buy it, what were they wearing, did they buy other food with it, or just a milkshake? Did he eat it in the restaurant or leave? And it turned out that about half of the milkshakes were sold before 8:30 in the morning. The customers were always alone. It was the only thing they bought, and they didn't eat it in the restaurant. They got in a car and drove off with it. So the next day, we convened again at 6 in the morning, but this time we positioned ourselves outside the restaurant so that we could confront these people as they were emerging with their milkshake. And in language that they could understand, we essentially said, "Excuse me, sir, but I have a real problem with your behavior here. What job arose in your life that caused you to come to hire a milkshake from McDonald's at 6:30 in the morning?" And as they would struggle to answer, we'd try to help them by saying, "Well, look, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come to McDonald's to hire a milkshake. What did you hire?" And it turned out that they had all the same job to do in the morning, and that is they had a long and boring drive to work. And they just needed something to stay awake. They weren't hungry yet, but they knew they'd be hungry by 10 o'clock. So they needed something that also wouldn't just keep them awake, but it would just go thunk and stay in their stomach for the morning. And that was the job. And so we asked them, think about the last time you were in the same situation, needing to get the same job done, but you didn't come to McDonald's to hire a milkshake. What did you hire? And one guy said, I never thought of it this way, but last Friday, I hired a banana to do the job. Take my word for it, never hire bananas. They're gone in 30 seconds. I hire donuts a lot, but I can never hire just one donut. And then my fingers get gooey and they put it on this. It doesn't do the job that well. Yeah, I do bagels sometimes, but they're so dry and tasteless. And so I have to steer the car with my knees while I'm putting the cream cheese on. And then if the phone rings, I have 2 hands and 3 problems. And that doesn't... Another guy said, I hired a Snickers bar to do this job once. Take my word, I just felt so guilty I haven't hired Snickers again. But let me tell you, when I come to McDonald's and hire this milkshake, it is so viscous that it takes me 23 minutes to suck it up that thin little straw. Who knows what the ingredients are? Well, I don't care. I just know that it's in my stomach all morning. And it turned out that the milkshake does the job better than any of the competitors. And the competitors are not just Burger King milkshakes, but it competes against bananas and donuts, bagels, Snickers bars, boredom, coffee, and many others. How big is the milkshake market? It's a serious question. How big is it? Well, of course, we don't have the data, but what we do know is the job from the customer's point of view is much bigger than the sum of the sales of milkshakes sold by McDonald's, Burger Kings, and Wendy's. Because from the customer's point of view, you compete against lots of other things in the customer's life. And so the time when they, in the parts of the country where they implemented a new strategy, they sold 7x the number of milkshakes because they were designing it to get the job done. And it turns, so what they did was they made it even thicker to take even longer to suck it up. And they moved the dispensing machine from behind of the counter to the front of the counter, and installed a prepaid swipe card so people could just dash in, gas up, and go, and never get caught behind the line. And so understanding the job turns out to be what was critical. I also have type 1 diabetes. And this device tells me how much time I have left in life. And I've got at least 3 hours, so that's all right. In the afternoon, I was hired for a very different job, which meant that the characteristics of the product had to be very different, so that a mother could sit down with a child and just had an hour focused time on what they were interested in. And Peter Drucker thought about this, unfortunately, before we did, when he said the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it's selling him. So that's the first thing that I'd like to remember, if you do anything, remember anything from my talk today, is that we can't succeed unless we understand the job that people are trying to do. And from the customer, from what you need to understand is the customer's point of view, who are your real competitors? And the probability of success is much greater. So there's another job out there somewhere near here needing to be done. And that job is, I need to get this from here to there as fast as possible with perfect certainty. Turns out that Julius Caesar had this job to do. But when he realized that was his job, he could hire a horseman and a chariot to get a job, or he could walk. When Victoria was Queen of England, and she had the very same job to do, she could hire a telegraph or a railroad to get it from here to there with perfect certainty as fast as possible. And when Churchill was Prime Minister, he at that point could hire an airplane to get that job done. And now Prime Minister May can hire DHL or the internet. But the job itself has been unvariable over the centuries. But the technology that you could invoke to get the job done, that's what changes. And a lot of times we think that, gosh, technology is changing so fast, we can't keep up with it. And that's true if we think of the business as the products that we were making. But if we think about the job to be done, jobs are very stable over very long periods of time. And if getting the job done perfectly for the customer is what we're focusing on, then when new technologies emerge, we can juxtapose that technology with your understanding of the job. And if it would help you do that job better, then you do it. But if it's a neat technology that is not critical to getting the job done, then you can pass on it. But the products that the businesses that we're in are much more predictable than we think if we look at it from a job to be done point of view. Now, I want to just go through what the logic of a job to be done looks like. At the bottom, or the foundation of the job, is the job that I need to know given the situation that I'm in. And we'll talk about a little bit later today how critical it is to understand the context in which they find themselves that caused them to hire a milkshake. Each job has a functional and emotional and social dimensions to the job. If we understand that in a deep way, then we can build the second layer on the architecture, which is, so if that's the job, what are the experiences in purchase and use that I need to provide the customers so that they will nail the job perfectly? And if I understand the experience that we need to provide the customer, then I can ask the next question in the architecture, which is, what and how do we need to integrate? And if we understand what we have to integrate and why, it allows us to define a brand that is what we call a purpose brand, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And that's what we think about as the architecture of a job to be done. So at the bottom level, the question we're asking is, what's the situation that I find myself in that causes me to get something, to get a job done? If I do that, then how will customers choose between hiring my product and somebody else's product? And the criteria by which this one is judged to be a better solution than that one is we're asking this question, what are the experiences in purchase and use? And that's how we give the score for the potential people that you might consider to buy that product. Then how do we provide the experiences required to get the jobs done? Those are processes that we have to put into place, and there needs to be somebody who is responsible for delivering the processes in order to give the experiences required to get the job done. And the purpose brand is, see, every time I find that I need a job to be done, I have to get up out of the chair and go out and look around and ask myself, is there somebody that makes a product that gets this job done? And if there is a brand that just pops into my head, I realize, gosh, if I buy that product, it'll nail the job done perfectly, I'll buy it. But if I find myself needing to get the same job done, but I look around the world that I'm in, and there isn't a brand that will guide me to buy the product that gets the job done, then I have to go on a treasure search and try to test this and try that and take it home and ask my brother what he thinks and turn it back in and try test drive this and buy that. And it's very costly to find a product to do the job if there isn't a purpose brand attached to it. So I'm going to ask you a question. The third of our 5 children, Michael, as I mentioned, unfortunately went to Stanford. And after about a week after he had arrived there, he called up and said, Mom and Dad, I found my apartment. I need to furnish my apartment tomorrow. And so poor Michael found himself with a job needing to be done. That is, I have to furnish my apartment tomorrow. You guys all, at some point, more often, found yourself getting that same job to be done. That is, I have to furnish this place tomorrow. When I describe that job, is there a brand that just pops into your mind as saying, I know exactly where I should go to get this job done? IKEA. How many people had that word, that brand IKEA pop into your mind when we wrote? Now keep your hands up. Look around. At least 90% of you experience that this pops into your mind when you have that job to do. And it's interesting, I've put here other brands that pops into your mind. But IKEA is a very interesting one because they started their business around 50 plus years ago. And they have been rolling their model around the world very carefully, and they have no competitors, none. And it can't be that they have secrets that other people can't access to. Anybody can go in and spend as much as they time working at them as they want. And it's not that there's no money in it. Their owner is the third richest guy in the world, and yet nobody can copy it. And our sense is that their customers are delighted to pay a premium price for crummy products. And the reason is that it does the job better than any of the other options, because all of the other options, as you have to go to Target and buy this chair, and you have to go somewhere else to get the equipment for your kitchen, and you have to go somebody else to get your towels and so on. And it is so expensive to do this and that, and oh crud, I forgot this, we need to go there, I disagree with, it is so costly to have to shop that they can charge their customers a premium price, and the customers are delighted to pay a premium price. And that's what we mean by a purpose brand. That is, it is a brand that pops into people every time the job arises in their life. You notice on the right-hand side, Jack Bauer is a purpose brand. And whenever we get in a really tough situation, we think, dang, where is Jack Bauer when we need him? Just some observations about understanding the job to be done. The first one is that jobs, as I mentioned with Julius Caesar, are very stable over long periods of time. They're not vulnerable to product life cycles. They are very stable, which predicts a lot of stability and predictability in your business, even though you don't think of it in those terms. Whereas products are easy to copy, integration around a job creates defensible differentiation. And in my language, if there is a competitor in a market that is organized around a job to be done, disruption rarely occurs. Because people who are coming at the bottom of the market with a simpler product, and they go to the market selling a product, you are very vulnerable to being disrupted, because you just have to have somebody with the cheaper version, and they will disrupt you, because all your business is your product versus the competitors. Whereas if you're integrated in a unique way, it's very hard for a disruptor with a simple offering to compete against you. Yeah, that's the point I just made. I'd like you just to think about this when you go home tonight, that at least one guy, Clay Christensen, has concluded that shopping and test driving are very expensive. So what I'd like to do now for 15 minutes or so is talk about, if I want to start a new business that has a reasonable success of succeeding, how can I find a job that I want to build my company around? The first one is competing against non-consumption. And I use this model a lot when I give talks in my research about disruption. And I'd like to describe disruption quickly here to give a sense of what we mean by competing against non-consumption. So you can characterize almost every product or market in terms of concentric circles. And what I mean by each of these is this innermost circle represent customers who have the most money and the most access. And then these larger circles represent larger populations of people who have progressively less money and less access. Almost always, at the beginning of a market, they start in the middle because the first products are complicated and expensive. and only the people who have access are people with money. And I'm going to describe how disruption occurs, and then give you that allows you to see what we mean by competing against non-consumption. In every market, you can characterize the market where the vertical axis is the performance of product over time. And in every market, there's a distribution of customers around your ability to utilize improvement. In every market, there's a second trajectory, which is how quickly can innovators provide better and better products. And almost always, our ability to create better and better products outstrips the ability of customers to use the product. And a product that isn't good at one point overshoots what people need at another later point in time. And innovations that help good products better, we call sustaining innovations. And what we found is invariably, when the question is who can make the best products, the incumbent leaders almost always dominate the battles of sustaining innovation because they have so much already in the market in their favor. But there is a different type of technology that we call disruptive technology. And we called the word disruptive not because it's a breakthrough improvement, but rather it defines a complicated, expensive product into a product that is so much more affordable and accessible that a whole new population of people could have access to it. And that's why we call it a disruptive innovation. And almost invariably, entrant companies are able to come in at the bottom of the market with simple customers and simple products and go up market and kill the incumbents. And that's why disruption is so powerful. But what we mean by non-consumption is in the history of any market, in the center are people who have a lot of money and skill. And any innovation that allows you to go to a larger population of people who, until you arrived at the scene, they were non-consumers. You then make them consumers, and that's an important question about creating a new market that have jobs to be done. So if you go back in the history of computing, the first products we called mainframe computers. They were the size of this podium here, cost $2 million. Only the largest corporations and largest universities could have one. And you had to have a PhD in computer science to operate them. And so there was a lot of non-consumption of computing at that time. And then there was a company in the Boston area called Digital Equipment Corporation. And they came in with a simpler product that enabled engineers to have access to computing. And they made these products that were called mini computers, were about the size of this podium here. Instead of $2 million, it was sold for $200,000. And so many more people could have access. And what Digital Equipment did that was so successful is they competed against non-consumption, not trying to compete against the mainframe. And then a personal computer came in the mid-1980s, and they made it so affordable and accessible that instead of $200,000, you could buy a personal computer for $2,000, and millions of people had access to computing where historically they had been non-consumers of computers. And then the smartphone came next, so that billions of people had access. So that's the concept of competing against non-consumption. Don't look at the competitors, but the non-competitors are opportunities for you to create growth. Think about how the world is playing out with electric cars. Tesla has entered with a lot of money, unfortunately. And they make a car that they sell for $100,000. And the reason why they has to price it at that level is in order to compete in the California freeways, every technology known to man have to be drawn upon to make a car that can go on the California freeway. It is a very costly venture. And they're going after people in the middle. And when you go after that market, you look around and say, oh yeah, there's a company called BMW. They want to have that $100,000 car. And so if Tesla becomes successful, the theory of disruption said BMW will be right after them. And they will either drive them out of the market or they'll acquire Tesla. But Tesla has chosen to compete against consumption. And there are very powerful competitors who like that space. But the next time you go to Beijing, just walking up and down the street for a couple of blocks, and about every 15th car is an electric car. And just stop a minute and feel it. It's made out of plastic. And it's narrow. Like I couldn't have another next to me. If my wife is with me, I have to fold her up and put her in the back seat. And it cost about $4,000. And it's not driven to compete on the California freeway. But they just have to go this and shop and do that and then get in the car and go there and deliver things and so on. And a small motor and a small motor battery do just fine. And they are competing against non-consumption. And what the theory suggests is that that's the market competing against non-consumption where the growth is. And that's the battleground on which electric will kill gasoline engines by competing against non-consumption. Because all that the companies who make that little car need to do is make a product that is better than nothing, which is the customer's other option. So a second question is, what's the progress the customer is trying to achieve? So it turns out that most of the jobs that arise in our lives don't solve the job once and forever. But rather, most of the jobs that arise in our lives are recurrent jobs. And so if we try to frame it to the customer as this will solve your problem, maybe it will, maybe it won't, but that's not how customers make decisions. Rather, we all try to make progress. And by making progress, rather than having it at a final ending point, it causes us to keep coming back to how am I doing? Should I take more of this and why, and so on. Oops. I took the wrong. We wrote a book called Disrupting Class. And the puzzle in the question in the book was, why is it that we're spending billions of dollars a year trying to improve our public schools and we just not make any progress at all? And we decided to go down to Providence, Rhode Island, and understand their public schools. And their inner schools were really inner. And they've worked their guts out to try to improve them with not much progress. Then we realized that school isn't a job that arises in people's lives. A school is something people could hire to get the job done. But that's not the job. The school isn't the job. The job is students every day need to feel successful. That's their job. And yeah, they could hire schools to get the job done. But most people, when they go to a public school, feel like failures at the end of the day. And so what else could they hire to get this job done to feel successful? Yeah, I can drop out of school and join a gang and feel successful. Or I can drop out of school and steal money and buy a car and cruise around the neighborhood in my car to feel successful. Or I could go to athletics because, boy, I don't like school, but I like basketball. And so they could hire basketball to feel successful. But when you realize what the job is, and that school is hired to do the job, boy, the schools don't do that job very well at all. And yet, understanding what the fundamental job is allows innovators in education to fundamentally change the way we deliver content and do projects and assignments so that every day students will come home feeling like they were successful in a difficult challenge. And when we organize around the job to be done, boy, it solves a lot of people's problems. And that's just an illustration of the principle that we are all struggling to improve in some way or another. And once you frame it in terms of that struggle or progress that we're making, it helps us develop better products that connect with customers' needs. Same thing as in online learning. Harvard doesn't feel as if they're being disrupted, but they are being disrupted by online learning and corporate universities. There is close to here, Southern New Hampshire University, and in the West, Governor's University. Each of them have about 80,000 customers or students. Most of it is delivered online. And they realize that there's another job out there. So the job that most of us who've gone to college experienced is we need a degree to get a job. And the other dimension of the job is I turned 18, and the last thing I want to do is to spend the rest of my life out under the thumb of my parents. I need to leave and express my independence of my parents. And to deliver that job, a college campus is something you could hire to do the job. But they realize there's another job, and that occurs in the lives of people who are 35 years old. They dropped out of school because they just didn't enjoy school, but now they need a better job, or they need a credential or a certification so that they can get a better job or get hired at a higher level than my current job. And when you realize that that's the job to do, then when I'm coming home at the end of a day and we've got 3 kids, and I don't want to get out of the freeway and go to some campus to sit in a boring class, but rather I need to be able to get an education after I put the children to bed. And I can make progress towards this goal of, and they have become very successful, nearly $1 billion in revenue in higher education that most universities would just die for. But they're succeeding because there's a job and there was nothing that people could hire to do the job done. Very quickly, another question I need to ask if I'm looking for where is there a job in my world that I could develop a product to get that job done? The Minute Clinic is a really important one. Next time you go to a CVS, more than half of the places you go into will say there's a Minute Clinic staffed by a nurse practitioner. And they won't address all of the ills that affect you. But if it's something that you could just, there's a no diagnosis, or you need a prescription for common illnesses, the last thing in the world you want to do is to go to see the doctor, because you know what's wrong. You just need a prescription to solve that problem. And now you can go to them in a clinic without an appointment. And they're growing like gangbusters. V8 is a great story, but I won't take the time. I guess there's more here than I don't have time. I think I have some time with some of you later that I'll try to go through the rest of these ideas about how do I find out there's a job. But for this purpose, what I'd like you to remember is, in order to be successful, you need to understand what's the job that is being done out there for which there is non-consumption. And if I go after non-consumption, try to understand the progress people are trying to meet, figure out what their customer is not wanting to do. If you have a purpose brand, there really is a formula for success. And these are really important variables in the formula. And I really am concluding with my colleagues the realization that innovation isn't a crapshoot if we understand a few things like what we've talked about. So those are my thoughts. I just work at the Harvard Business School, and if you have any criticisms or cannonballs or criticisms, call me up, and I'll try to think these through as best I can. Thank you.
I had a chance to speak with Clay a couple weeks ago about, three truths and a surprise, and I won't go through them all, but I will tell you that I was inspired by what he thinks about in terms of legacy. There's no question that Clay has left a huge wake in terms of thinking and mentorship and wisdom related to why we're all here today. But I found it personally inspiring that what he's most proud of is his latest book, which is How Will You Measure Your Life? Clay is more concerned about faith and family as his legacy than what he just talked about. So thank you for that inspiration. It's my honor now to introduce David Duncan. David Duncan is a senior partner at Innosight. He's the co-author of Competing Against Luck. He has a 5-year-old daughter named Zoe, so lucky him. And then something you probably wouldn't know about Dave, unless you asked him behind stage like I did, he's a super early adopter. He had a drone a few years ago. He lives on the water, and he found out these things are really powerful, so he started doing wildlife photography, and then he started chasing flocks of birds and filming them until he decided that maybe wasn't so nice. So give it up for Dave Duncan, ladies and gentlemen.
Morning. So we thought we would spend just the last 10, 15 minutes or so doing a bit of a fireside chat without a fire, some Q&A around the book, and I'll start asking some questions. Go ahead, Clay.
Dave and I were co-authors of the book, and he's a lot smarter than he looks.
I appreciate that, thank you. And it was a great privilege to be able to work on the book with Clay and learn from him and collaborate with him and our other two co-authors. So first question for you, Clay. You are renowned as the kind of father of the theory of disruptive innovation, and that's a term that's made it into the popular lexicon and that is used and misused in a lot of ways, but the original theory and idea came from your early research.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do you relate the idea of jobs to be done to the theory of disruption?
I don't understand it all like I need to, but I found that doing a diagram like the one I did here is a way to frame how different factors interact to get different results. And there really are not any examples that I've been able to find of a company that went through these levels of the architecture. What's the job with emotional and social dimensions to it? And then what are the experiences that we've got to deliver to the customer that they will sum up to nailing the job perfectly? And then how do we need to integrate things together? What are the processes we have to establish in order to provide the experiences to get the jobs done? This is a very complicated situation that somebody who simply has a better product or a cheaper product, they can't get there. Mm-hmm. And so they get traction when it is my product against your product. But when it's my product against your system, like I said with IKEA, people are delighted to pay a premium price for something that gets the job done because the other option is very costly. And that's the big idea that I never realized, is that disruption is a very powerful factor that kills successful companies. And we see IBM going down the cliff now because of disruption. But the solution to that is focus your company around a job to be done in that way.
And I mean, one of the things that we wrote about in the book is this idea that jobs can be a very powerful frame for defining and understanding the business you're in. But companies, when they start out, to get any traction at all, whether they consciously are doing it or not, they have to be solving for somebody's job in a way that's compelling.
Yes.
But then as they organize to scale and they grow and they get bigger, they start to lose focus of the fact that their business is really about solving for a job, and they start to think about themselves as being in the business of delivering a certain product. And I wonder, is that phenomenon something that drives why incumbents become vulnerable to disruption?
Boy, Dave, it's a big deal. Turns out that data, God has never created data. He's created a lot of things, but data isn't one of them. And every piece of data exists because some person looked at a problem or something happened, and you develop data to describe that problem. But the data itself isn't the phenomenon. It represents the phenomenon. And so when we're trying to understand where there's an opportunity for us, we need to understand not just a piece of data, but what's the context in which the job arose. And understanding the context, there's very little data about the context, because somebody who put together the data, most of them are looking at products, they're not looking at the context. And as I get my company going and we ship our products to get the jobs done, data comes back into you, and the data that we receive is all about the product or the customers. And so little by little, as this data just comes in and surrounds us, data about products and customers, we then think about our business in terms of products and customers. And because the context doesn't program.
The context isn't you can't view it through this narrow slice of information called data, right?
Yeah, that's right. We changed the way we framed the boundary of our business by products and customers. And a generation of managers later, you've just totally lost your sense of what's the job to be done.
Right, and then the disruptor comes in, and they're not encumbered by your legacy data constraints. They're just looking at a customer and trying to understand their job, and that's why they figure out a different set of trade-offs, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And I think the data challenge is even worse in the sense that the shareholders, the equity analysts on Wall Street, they're all evaluating you and measuring your success from the perspective of this product-oriented data. They're looking at your market share of product sales. They're saying, are your product sales growing? And that kind of reinforces the focus on the product as opposed to the job.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, good. So another question for you. I think we would agree that all industries can benefit from this kind of thinking. Are there some industries that you think are more in need of this than others, given where they are?
Yeah, let me bring it right to home.
Yeah.
The Harvard Business School badly needs this because we are being disrupted. Now, I'll be critical about Harvard because it would not be polite to go after Stanford or MIT. But what's happened in our world is that there have been no constraints around the escalation of costs. And so we do something that beats MIT, and then MIT adds more to their program to beat us, and then we do this to beat Stanford, and we're in an arms race, and the cost of an MBA has been increasing at about 11% per year for 50 years. And today, to get an MBA from Harvard is about $300,000 as you walk away from your salary for a couple of years, and then we soak them for a lot more when they're at Harvard. And so more and more, the only companies that can recruit our graduating students are McKinsey and private equity shops, because they can pay a premium price so that our graduating customers will able to pay off their debts. But operating companies don't hire MBAs from good schools anymore because we have overshot the salary structure that most operating companies can provide. And so more and more what operating companies are doing is they're setting up their own universities in-house. And rather than send people through a semester of strategy, we'll give you a week of strategy so that you can do a better job making this presentation to the board. And we'll take a 2-week course on how to manage new product development because we're crummy at that, we need to make it better. And these online corporate universities, we learn when as a principle, people will learn when they're ready to learn, not when we're ready to teach them. Mm-hmm. And so most of the people who go to our MBA program, we teach them and it goes through because they're not needing to learn that. But if instead people will learn when they're ready to learn, if we're responsible and ability to custom what customers need and they learn it and do it and come back, it's a better model. And is this a threat to the Harvard Business School or an opportunity? Holy cow. There is so much non-consumption of good insight about management. If Harvard could just feed that so that people who are trainers in corporate universities, we need to make it so idiot simple that a average trainer from a third-rate training program could teach better strategy than Michael Porter, so that we could commoditize Porter. There's so much opportunity there. I don't think they could commoditize me, but Porter they
could. Doesn't Harvard Business School listen to you when you tell them these things?
Yeah, but the data isn't clear,
right?
Because you look at, there's still a lot of rich people who can pay the price, and McKinsey continues to.
Yep.
And so there's no data about the future. The only way you can see the future is if you have a theory that helps you frame things,
Yep. Yep.
And medical healthcare is another huge opportunity.
Yep.
That we don't need to go into it, but I'll go into a little. Most people don't want to be sick. That's their job. And so if we develop products that help people become healthy, everybody needs health care when they're sick. Nobody needs health care when they're healthy. And so the failure is just dominant that world. And figuring out how can people behave differently so that when they're healthy, they are trying to stay healthy, is an important, I think it's an important insight to the industry for which there are not a lot of good solutions yet.
So I think we just have a couple minutes left. A last question for you. One of the things you notice when you start using this jobs concept is that it applies to every aspect of life, not just business and thinking about innovation, but you can start asking, what jobs to be done are, the people that I work with or my family trying to get done, or, why do people hire certain politicians versus others? And I know that you've talked in the past about needing to understand the jobs to be done for which your wife hired you to be her husband. And I wonder if you want to just share that maybe as a closing anecdote.
Yeah. So I truly have tried to be a good husband. I tried to be selfless. I tried to predict what I can see Christine needs and solve the problem before she realizes, And I try to never work on Sunday or Saturday so that I could spend my time raising good kids and be a good husband. And I honestly have tried to do this. But I think on the outside, somebody would judge me to be mediocre. And my insight about this occurred a number of years ago when we had 3 little kids under the age of 5. And I came home on the 6:05 train to Belmont and walked in the back door, and it was a mess. And the kids were still in their pajamas, and there's peanut butter all over the kitchen, and who knows what Christine was up to that whole day, But I love her, and so I just took my jacket off and cleaned up the kitchen, did the dishes, made dinner, put the kids in their pajamas. This took me like an hour and a half, And then I realized, gosh, I haven't seen Christine. So I went up to her bedroom, and she was just steaming mad at me. And I said, "What's wrong, Chris?" And she said, "Why do you ignore me?" And I said, "Christine, I haven't ignored you. I've been in the big kitchen for an hour and a half." And she said, "I've been with those children already for 15 hours, and I need to speak to an adult. That's what I need." And I realized that I thought I was a good husband. In reality, I looked at what I think Christine needed, and I tried it as her, that I needed to, I understood her, and I would give her what I thought she needed. And about 20% of the time when I buy something that I think Christine needs, or make something for her that she needs, about 20% of the time she's just delighted with what I give her. And about 80% of the time...
20% seems like a pretty good track record.
And I realized that I have no idea what are the jobs that arise in Christine's life for which she might want to hire a husband, And so I decided that I would just study, not Christine, but the jobs that arise in Christine's life. And almost everything, there are options like bananas and donuts for Snickers bars. And if I could understand the jobs that arise in Christine's life and then try to become the kind of person that Christine would want to hire to resolve these problems, I would be a better husband. And I really put my work to it, you know, and probably I got a lot more time to go. But of the insights that have made my life more productive and satisfying, it's kind of odd, isn't it? But the conclusion here is that the customer is the wrong unit of analysis. It's the job that we need to understand. And that has made a big difference in my life. And I offer that to everybody here.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great way to close. And thanks everybody for coming today. And give you a round of applause.